Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about O.T.K Games' 2D hack and slash, The Vagrant. But did this title manage to do a service to its fans, or did it ultimately fail to stack up? You take the role of one Vivian Vermilion, a vagrant and sellsword. The game kicks off with our awkwardly alliterative heroine finding herself shipwrecked, though this development is more of a mild inconvenience on her quest to find her missing family. Really, the major inconvenience is it barely takes the span of a single afternoon for her to become party to the savage slaughter of a village, and then wind up press-ganged by a witch with a bad attitude and a belt-bound bondage outfit. Stuck carrying out her whims in the hope she might survive and get to the bottom of the mystery surrounding her family. Vivian's troubles have only begun. Also, I swear to God, that should probably read Vermilion, but it really is Vermilion. Like a vavoom. Also, that alliterative thing? Totally hereditary, FYI. Anyways, those small notes aside, my feelings on the game's overall narrative is mixed. On one hand, I didn't mind the overall storyline of the game, and there was definitely some cute and interesting characters to come across, and some neat bits of backstory you can unearth as you proceed to the game. That said, the actual quality of the writing isn't necessarily one of its strengths, and I found myself wanting to vigorously slap the hell out of a number of the characters. There's definitely times where the pace of the game felt off, or where the unfurling of a moment just left me feeling like the narrative payoff was a lot weaker than the build-up. That said, it was fun to unearth the extra endings squirreled throughout the game. And I do mean squirreled, given the path to the true end is fairly obtuse. In fact, the way I found it was pretty close to happenstance given my exploration habits, and the rest? Those were optional since they hinge on dismally dying in duels at pivotal moments. Bosses. Well, that, or murder ganking a specific boss you really have no business winning against. Hint, hint. Anyways, since we're on the subject of stabification, let's move on to the mechanics. Given The Vagrant is a hack and slash adventure, the crux of your time will be spent in combat. Yes, there's downtime where you'll be advancing the story or milling about in town gearing up, but beyond the main story beats, there isn't too much in the way of side content to be pursued in these hubs. Moreover, the shops just tend to have prices that feel so daunting you'll become convinced that Adam Smith hates your guts. Really, taking strolls in the monster-infested wilderness looked downright hospitable by comparison. Really, taking strolls in the monster-infested wilderness looked downright hospitable by comparison. And there is an ample amount of animosity-filled adversaries to hone your skills against. Some of them roam freely, but others bide their time, waiting for you to walk over certain spots in the map so they can stick you in a locked screen deathmatch, which can get a little bit awkward, honestly, in the latter case, since that same fight has a chance of triggering all over again while you're running around that spot picking up mob drops. Anyways, though your combat skills do start out fairly basic, as you acquire mana from fights, you'll be able to start investing into your skill tree and acquiring new combo abilities. I mean, okay, the aerial launching move felt clunky and didn't really flow well overall, but the gains in stats and general flexibility help a lot as you progress. That said, it's not gonna be too long to discover one of the game's main ways of motivating you to explore the far reach of its world. See, there's barriers in your skill tree that you can't advance past until you find some optional items scattered about. And while some of them are fairly hard to miss since they rest right along the main story path, there is a fair amount scattered through the far reaches of the map, and given that the map is a bit of a headache to read and doesn't necessarily showcase hidden rooms, it's quite possible to find yourself gimped unless you thoroughly explore. And this is even more notable for the rage moves. These potent abilities essentially serve as your finishers and bread and butter to your combos, providing delightfully flashy moves to either clear out the trash or decisively damage bosses, provided you build some of the meter by comboing. That said, to get these abilities will require you to scour the game for them, as they tend to be even more well hidden than the key items needed to advance the skill tree. What I found especially notable about the rage moves, however, was that they could be further modified. And I'm not just talking about the fact that some have modifiers in the skill tree. Which, I mean, that is the case though, and it's pretty neat. See, what I'm actually talking about is some of the weapons you'll acquire in the game have elemental modifiers, which apply potent proc effects on heavy hits. That said, they also modify how rage attacks work, which actually makes it super rewarding to try out the different moves with an assortment of weapons. And mastering these elements helped a lot, because the game does begin to escalate in difficulty a fair bit. Some of it is by virtue of some generally ruthless combat and boss encounters that you'll end up finding yourself facing off against. That said, I found myself highly valuing the ability to shred things more because of the normal areas than anything. The game has a rather nasty penchant as you progress to load up areas with traps meant to annoy you or set you back, potentially in tandem with enemies who will shoot at you from several screens away, possibly while engaging in some not so engrossing platforming to boot. It might also find the time to slap some status effects in the way too. And, you know, in the case of the slowing effect in particular, that's a absolute dreary nightmare. It reduces you to a crawl. There's enemies that can afflict you with it from afar. It'll stick to you even if you change screens, and I just hate it. I would rather be frozen or petrified, and those both suck too. That's not to say you don't have defenses against it. You can cure them with antidotes, or antitoads. Look, it's basically antidotes, but sort of misspelled. Anyways, that said, you can expect to be subjected to these statuses a lot, sometimes while dealing with a screen packed full of enemies. Such is the case of the challenge rifts. See, these areas are completely optional, but if you're looking to get some gold, items, precious mana, or just, you know, challenge everything the game has to offer, it'll likely behoove you to scour an area once you've cleared it to take a shot at the rifts. Some of them are genuinely neat by providing different takes on bosses or some pretty fraught enemy encounters. Other ones degenerate into just a complete clusterfuck. Still, if you really do want to face off against everything the game has to muster, they offer some really good practice for the bonus dungeon. And, you know, speaking of everything it has to offer, would you like some RNG in your RNG? In your RNG? Well, let me tell you about runes. See, the Vagrant does have a system that allows you to level up your gear by investing mana into them. Whilst this allows you to power them up in and of itself, this act also opens up rune slots in your weapon, which you can in turn then set runes into to provide them power boosts. What I found to be a complete nuisance about this system is just the entirety of its process. See, the acquisition of runes, in and of itself, by its very friggin' nature, is random. I never found a location where I could buy any. Instead, you need to rely upon the sparse drops you might find, with the crux of the ones I found being from the rifts, or by disassembling equipment. That said, this latter process is a time and experience consuming gamble. See, there's a number of elements at play to make the act of disassembling gear punishing. First off, you need to upgrade gear enough so that you can see what runes are in the weapon to get a chance at acquiring that rune, if it even has any. You don't get to find that out until you spend the mana. What's more, the types of rune that show up are more or less arbitrary, and the giant frigging insulting cherry on top of all this is not only do you get no choice in what rune you'll try and harvest from the item, the actual act of harvesting is far from a guarantee that you'll get anything. It's entirely possible to sit down and break multiple weapons all in a row and get nothing. Oh, and you need to find key items to even get the ability to harvest decent tier runes from anything, so expect to clutter up your inventory if you intend on going ham in this system. It's a friggin' nightmare, and I hated tinkering with it, and even if I did manage some impressive results, that was after hours of this garbage. And I also despised the fact that I had no means of upgrading or fusing earlier level runes and just had to put up with them cluttering my inventory. Oh, and the gripes don't actually end there, by the way. See, what I also forgot to mention is that while the runes do list a general idea of what they do, they don't actually tell you what the exact stats are. So you don't actually just have to gamble with them before investing them into your gear. To this day, I still don't know how exactly the health or rage generation runes work, or how they stack up with multiple variants of themselves, or if they even do, since there's no way to track exactly what they're doing. You just get a vague idea / descriptor of what the runes do, and you're expected to slot it into your weapons. The end. That's all. There you go. It's fantastic. End my existence. Just give me a second. I just raised my blood temperature up there. Okay, right. So, with that intense ramble aside, I do have to admit the Vagrant is quite pretty to look at. I'm a huge fan of VanillaWorks games like Odin Sphere and Muramasa, and to a certain degree, I found the aesthetic to the Vagrant extremely reminiscent of it. The world and the monsters are gorgeous to behold, but holy shit, I feel like I need to furtively put my hand over the screen whenever my housemate walks in the room because of how scantily clad the protagonist is. Forget trying to find the mysteries of her past. I could do with an epic quest to find new clothes or at least a long cloak to hide in. Even a single extra outfit would have been nice. That had more layers. This is not a hint for bikini. She's already too close to that. That said, while I didn't have much in the way of fashion options, I was at least able to get a different looking sword, and I was actually rather fond of the way the different elemental effects not only changed the function of the attacks, but also provided different animations. Moving on to the audio, again, I have some mixed feelings here. For one thing, there's vocals for all the characters in the game, but they aren't in English. Now, I will say the sheer tone and strength of voice actors does actually manage to be complementary to the dialogue in a few areas. Shout out to my angry serving girl in the starting town, but for the most part, the impact was lost. Likewise, the soundtrack was also a bit hit and miss, since there's some fun tracks to accompany some of the battles, but other moments where there was just nothing. I had nothing to accompany my adventure for lengthy periods of time other than the sounds of monsters getting stabbed. Anyways, this brings us to our dramatic conclusion, and I have to say, despite my nitpicks, I did like the Vagrant. It managed to provide a pretty engrossing hack and slash for me to romp through, enough so that kept me coming back despite the fashion faux pas of looking like an extra out of an eroge. There's some great boss fights to encounter, and the combat system really does get interesting as the game proceeds along. That said, it was still a far from perfect experience. The story was a middling affair for me at best, with the conclusion doing very little to clear that up. It honestly felt a bit abrupt on a narrative level. Between that and the bevy of small issues that plagued me through the game, including its devout hatred of my PS4 controller, the abominable font, my inability to map enter as the use key, just don't do it, man, just don't do it, or a few other odds and ends, it ultimately led to me coming away with the feeling that this game was a fumble. If you're looking for some stabby action and fan service, this can definitely provide, but if you're looking for narrative depth or a well-oiled experience, it's plausible that this is going to trip you up. Also, get fucked, rune system. Get fucked. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content whenever the Corona Apocalypse ends, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link on the banner or in the description so you can become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor and make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and the banner for them links. That said, I'll catch you folks on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.